Right, welcome back for our next session. So I'd like to introduce Steve Cassidy. He's part of BT's applied research team. He's a senior research manager at BT, and his topics of research is such a sweet spot for the kind of topics we're discussing today and tomorrow. But he leads the research on behavioral organization and system science with a particular interest between people, information technology, and organizational structure, and how this impacts culture. And I think we're going to hear this culture word throughout this over the next couple of days. So on that note, Steve, I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, I'm going to talk about the dynamics of digitalization. So what happens, how do you keep digitalized industries and the technologies in step as things change, as the business changes, as people change? Through the build, the operation, and the refresh. So keeping the connections relevant over that period of time. And the questions that this poses, research questions it poses, are very much some interdisciplinary. And you'll hear that from the other talkers as well, which is why the collaborations with the universities are so vital here. And we have collaborations with some of the fellow panelists and other people in the room. And these questions are very big, and they apply to any industry. But I'll just start off by giving a bit of telecom context. So the first point is that the future is now looking at discontinuous with the past. So if you look at the past evolution of telecoms, there's a bit more bandwidth, adding visuals, adding the ability to be mobile. But what we see emerging is a whole spectrum of completely new applications. So just taking some of those, let's talk about haptics, where now we have to coordinate the very low data rate, but very time-dependent sensations with high resolution video. We could go into holographic communication with the huge bandwidth there. Coordinating fleets of drones or fleets of vehicles, which require extremely secure and high-speed coordination. Massive movements of secured data, the integration with other information for travel, and the ability for users perhaps to select different viewpoints in a sports game, or object-based media, where the story is put together, be it news or a film, according to what your preferences are and how much time you have available. So a huge spectrum of different capabilities. And probably if I was to draw this slide in a year's time, there'd be another set of possible services there. So in other words, the future is unpredictable and very complicated. And what we want to do is have an infrastructure which understands those needs of the human being on the fly and come back with some sort of agreement of what is the nearest that can be on offer and an agreement reached and a service provided. So the question is, how do we do this? And if we look at traditional telecoms in any industry, we have a fixed design with boxes doing things, and we have people running around making sure all that works, dealing with a huge complexity around the outside. So the people are very internally focused, which means that the poor old customer feels a little distance from that, and it's a bit mechanical. I'm sure you'll recognize this with many digital industries. And the business itself, perhaps, doesn't get an overview of what's happening down there. So what we do is we put it all in software, which sounds nice and easy. But the idea is to decouple the service provision from the hardware renewal and capital-intensive timescales, so that we can be much more kind of reactive. And that we get the people from the inside to the outside. So the people are the business people and the customers and all the other interested parties who have an ability to agree on that infrastructure to do and provide it, which sounds marvelous. How do you do that? And what you do is you need software to manage the software. You need some sort of computing power and some techniques which can abstract from the network or your infrastructure generally what it is that people want to know and what controls they want on the system. So here's my one piece of science, but it has a purpose, which is essentially what the process is of designing these things, is to find data and measures which are most cogent for your business purpose and your personal goal. So whether you're trying to sort of find information that's relevant, or you're trying to find a recommendation of what action you take in the network, or whether, in some cases, you just take that action automatically. The game is to increase this mutual information, to shuffle forward, make compromises with your goal and your purpose, to understand what data measures you have, to maximize that coherency. So there's a lot of analysis around this, and what's interesting is that it's no one party here is privileged. So in other words, it's as important to analyze the business goals and to understand all that as it is the domain knowledge and the technical goals there. So it's highly iterative and can't be designed a priori. It emerges. It's an emergent solution, which is a very different process from how we organisationally design and roll things out now. And I think there's a cultural and skill impact here that there needs to be an appreciation of other contributions in a much less siloed way than we have now, and a very different practice around it. So what is the design process? I think it's a big question that we're just getting through. The other thing is that things change. So if we're innovating, if things change, then what happens is that the data that you have historically is now no longer relevant. So data has a half-life. And so you have to have an appreciation of what the dynamics are and analyze as you decrease the amount of data because you need recency, then the inaccuracy and the risk and the decision increases. So you need to be aware of that. That needs to be built into the system as well. And it's easy to miss these things. Furthermore, your goal changes. You may wish to, in telecoms term, increase the capital capacity so that you reduce costs of operations later on. It could be that you want to invest more in the network and in operations to increase service levels. So all those balances change the goal and the purpose. So what this brings to question is, what is a design? Because we have something that's emergent, we have data that's changing, it's not at all like the historical world. And this, again, is a very deep cultural and organizational issue. So the design is more about the metadata and the business logic and the auditable trail of decisions that led to that setup. And that's the means of explainability. So what is a design is something that I think is just really beginning to be a research question that's tackled. And it's quite a mind shift. The other thing about these pictures is that we have decided what the goal is, and we've decided what the available data and measures are, but these things create externalities. So the system is incapable of seeing what you've not told it. And so you need a means to extract from that and understand what the effect is on the wider world. So on service, on costs, on legality, whatever the consequences are, and then have a means to feed that back into the system. So you need a second loop learning, which is external to the system, which is a piece of horizon scanning and what-if scenario building in a more formal way than we have in organizations at the moment. So this, of course, is very complicated, and we need models to manage the software, which is managing the software. Risk models, digital twins, a whole panoply. And how do we coordinate decisions around that? So basically to humanize the network. Some of the externalities are the fact that now, as the technology rolls out, we have more of these systems, and they inevitably will interact. They're using the same data, they're affecting the same real world. So we have to understand what the kind of potential instabilities and risks are around that. So how do we create superordinate goals? Because otherwise, what we do is replicate some of the problems that exist in current organizations, which is that you have an agent looking after cost, an agent looking after service, and you end up with the clashing of aims that you would have in a human organization. But at least you do have the technology to sort of detect these things. And you can use that to federate learning and increase the speed of learning. So just to summarize, when it comes to the build stage, the design is emergent, and it's not an a priori design. It's a very different process, and so we need overlapping between very different skills. To operate, you need to understand the system dynamics, and the system needs self-knowledge. When is a decision I'm taking now not supported by the data? And then how do we keep connected to the outside world, to this external view? And I'll just finish with one extra, which is you have to keep it interesting and relevant for people. So you need 1 + 2 + 3 to create sufficient trust in the system to make it safe to operate and for people to be happy with it and to be engaged with it. But you also need to move the whole concept from managing a network to having something that's creative and being able to excite through what-if models and through the possibilities there, so that people come and can interact with the system and not just feeling that they're part of the machine.
Cool. Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Once again, some really fascinating insights in terms of using some of the critical systems that a lot of companies use to try to get transformation embedded into their organizations. Like I said, if you were here for the opening comments, this is a hugely complex area. Any kind of tool or systems that may help us get there has got to be beneficial in some way, as long as people understand what's going on under the hood or the bonnet, depending on which country we're in at the end of the day. So great. So thank you very much for that, Steve. We'll bring this session to a close, and then I'll see you on the next session in a few minutes with Dr. Will Venter. Thank you very much.